The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the first atomic bombs ever to be dropped on an enemy city. They occurred in July 1945 and were designed to force Japan to surrender to the Allies. The bombs were dropped after 6 months of firebombing 67 other Japanese cities. The bombs were developed in a project called the Manhattan Project. This was a joint venture between the US, Canada, and the UK to build the first atomic bombs. It was started in 1930 because of fears that Germany was making nuclear bombs of its own. The research was directed by J. Robert Oppenheimer, and the project employed 130,000 people. It cost $2 million, which would be worth $24 million today. The first bomb, called the Gadget, was tested at Trinity Site on July 16, 1945. There were 3 different bombs that were developed by the Manhattan Project. The first bomb was the Gadget, which was a test bomb. It was an implosion-style bomb that used plutonium-239. In this bomb, plutonium is surrounded by high explosives that compress the matter, creating a critical mass. This causes the bomb to explode. Little Boy was the second bomb created. It used the gun method to fire a hollow mass of uranium-235 into a solid target spike. The combination created a critical mass. The third and final bomb was called Fat Man. In Fat Man, a sphere of plutonium was placed in the center of a hollow sphere of explosives. The explosives fired to produce pressure on the core and created a critical mass the same way the Gadget did. The next step was choosing the targets. They must be larger than 3 miles in diameter and important targets in a large urban area. The blast from the bomb would have to create effective damage, and they had to be unlikely to be attacked by August 1945. Kyoto, Hiroshima, Yokohama, and the arsenal at Kokura were recommended targets. The Potsdam Declaration, or the proclamation defining terms for Japanese surrender, was an ultimatum issued on July 26, 1945. It stated that if Japan did surrender, it would face prompt and utter destruction. It was issued by U.S. President Truman, UK Prime Minister Churchill, and China's leader, Chiang Kai-shek. On July 28th, Japan rejected the ultimatum, saying that it was fake and that they would ignore it. Truman decided to use nuclear weapons to make Japan scared, thereby ending the war easier. Hiroshima was a communication center, a storage point, and an assembly area for troops. Some military camps were located nearby. Hiroshima was not firebombed like other Japanese cities, so the nuke could do as much damage as possible. Once word of the upcoming air raid reached Japan, Hiroshima was evacuated. However, the population was still 225,000 at the time of the bombing. Hiroshima was the primary target of the first bombing mission on August 6th. Kokura and Nagasaki were alternative targets. The B-29 Enola Gay, piloted by Commander Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from Northfield Air Base on Tinian, 6 hours away from Japan. It was accompanied by 2 other B-29s, the Great Artiste, flown by Charles Sweeney, and the Necessary Evil, flown by George Marquardt. These were instrumentation and photography aircraft, respectively. The aircraft made their way separately to the U.S.-controlled Iwo Jima, where they rendezvoused at 8,000 feet. From there they flew to Japan. Navy Captain Parson armed the bomb during the flight, and Second Lieutenant Jepson removed the safety device 30 minutes before reaching the target. The bomb was released at 8:15 Japan time. The release was uneventful. Little Boy took 57 seconds to fall to 1,900 feet above ground level. It detonated over the Shima Surgical Clinic. The radius of total destruction was 1 mile, and there were fires across 4.4 miles. 4.7 miles of the city was destroyed. Later, the fleet returned to Iwo Jima. Enola Gay would become a weather scout aircraft for the Nagasaki mission, but the Great Artiste and the Necessary Evil would not fly with it. The results were drastic. 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed immediately, and another 70,000 were injured. 140,000 were dead by the end of 1945. Over 90% of doctors and nurses were killed or injured because they were in the downtown area. No warning was given, and the air raid was not expected because only 3 aircraft were sighted. Afterwards, Japan still refused the Potsdam Declaration, and the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. New bombs were shipped to Tinian. President Truman said this about the bombing. The world will know that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war. Nagasaki was one of the largest seaports in southern Japan. It had wide-ranging industrial activity. Some firebombs were dropped on Nagasaki on August 1st, which led to evacuation, mainly of schoolchildren. On August 9th, 1945, Boxcar, commanded by Major Charles Sweeney, with Fat Man on board, took off from Tinian. Kokura was the primary target, and Nagasaki was secondary. Two B-29s flew ahead as weather scouts, and two B-29s flew with Boxcar for instrumentation and photography. The weather scouts reported both targets clear. However, the airplane Big Sting failed to make the rendezvous. Boxcar continued to Japan after 40 minutes of circling. Once the aircraft arrived at Kokura, a cloud cover obscured 70% of the city, preventing the required visual bombing. The fleet headed to Nagasaki. Calculations along the way show that they wouldn't have enough fuel to return to Iwo Jima. They would have to land at Okinawa instead. If Nagasaki was also covered by clouds, they would have to drop Fat Man in the ocean because it was too unsafe to land with an armed bomb. At 7:50 Japanese time, an air raid alarm sounded in Nagasaki, but the all-clear signal was given at 8:30. Clouds obscured Nagasaki, but a last-minute break in the clouds permitted the bomb to be dropped. At 11:01, Fat Man dropped, and nearly 43 seconds later, it exploded at 1,540 feet above ground level. The epicenter was nearly 2 miles northwest of what was planned, and some of the city was protected by the surrounding hills. The radius of total destruction was 1 mile, and there were fires across 2 miles. Some of the survivors of Hiroshima had fled to Nagasaki, only to be bombed again. The fleet returned to Okinawa, but the bombing was considered a failed mission. As a result of the Nagasaki bombing, 40 to 75,000 people died immediately. By the end of 1945, 80,000 were dead as a result of the blast and the radiation. More atomic bombs were planned for August, September, and October bombings. However, these bombs were not used once Japan surrendered. Japan said that they would surrender if Hirohito and his actions weren't prejudiced against in any way. Hirohito said this about the surrender. Moreover, the enemy now possesses a new and terrible weapon with the power to destroy many innocent lives and do incalculable damage. Should we continue to fight, not only would it result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. Such being the case, how are we to save the millions of our subjects, or to atone ourselves before the hallowed spirits of our imperial ancestors? This is the reason why we have ordered the acceptance of the provisions of the Joint Declaration of the Powers. After the surrender, the Allies occupied Japan. 40,000 Allies occupied Hiroshima and 27,000 occupied Nagasaki. The bombing ended World War II as Germany had already surrendered. The Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission was established to study the effects of radiation on survivors of the atomic bomb. While investigating, many unintended casualties were found, including Allied prisoners of war, Korean and Chinese laborers, students from Malaya, and 3,200 Japanese American citizens. The suffering caused by the bombings have led Japan to try to have all nuclear bombs destroyed forever. Japan has one of the world's firmest anti-bomb policies. A large controversy exists around the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. People who support the bombings claim that it's better than invading Japan because more Allies and Japanese would die in the invasion. They say that a speedy end of the war prevented prolonged fighting, and it was a necessary part of total war if you wanted to defeat Japan. They also claim that Japan's leaders refused to surrender and that this was the only way to convince them. The people against the bombings claim that atomic bombing is immoral. In fact, it was even a war crime because so many innocent people were killed. Some say that it was terrorism because the only purpose was to instill fear in Japan. They also claim it was unnecessary because Japan was already defeated and they were ready to surrender. These are the only atomic bombs that have ever been used in warfare so far. However, development of nuclear bombs and devices has continued. We hope that we will never have to use these weapons of mass destruction again and that our world can live in peace.